In a converted basement in small-town Iowa, a 67-year-old grandmother was about to discover her family's betrayal. What started as a Christmas visit took a shocking turn when she uncovered their plan to steal her independence. Margaret Thompson wasn't your typical retired librarian. For decades, she had mastered technology and research, known for her sharp mind and digital expertise. When she encountered evidence of systematic manipulation through her own security cameras, she was walking into a battle for her autonomy. Her response, technological warfare from their basement prison, would shatter their lies completely. What began as exile became digital rebellion. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Iowa wind carried the promise of snow as Maggie Thompson pulled her Honda Civic into the driveway of what should have been home for Christmas. She sat for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, studying the house she'd helped Michael and Becca buy 15 years ago. The memory surfaced unbidden. How proud she'd been, co-signing the mortgage, watching her son finally settle down with a woman who seemed to adore him. The house looked different now. Smaller somehow, despite the expensive renovations she'd noticed over her increasingly infrequent visits. Through the front window, she could see the glow of the Christmas tree she'd asked about in their phone calls. "Oh, we're going all out this year, Mom," Michael had said, his voice carrying that forced enthusiasm she'd learned to recognize. "The kids are so excited to have you here for the whole weekend." Maggie gathered her overnight bag and the carefully wrapped gifts she'd spent weeks selecting. Emma was 16 now, too old for toys, but still young enough to appreciate the vintage leather journal Maggie had found at an estate sale. Jake, 13 and artistic like his grandfather Robert had been, would love the professional sketching set. For Michael and Becca, she'd chosen something practical, a smart home upgrade kit, though she suspected they didn't realize she already knew more about their current system than they did. The front door opened before she could knock. Becca stood, framed in the doorway, her smile as precisely arranged as the holiday wreath behind her. "Maggie, you made it." The embrace that followed felt like a performance, all surface warmth with an underlying stiffness that spoke of obligation rather than affection. "How was the drive?" "Not too difficult, I hope." There it was, the subtle implication that the 2-hour drive from Cedar Rapids might be challenging for someone her age. Maggie had been making longer drives since before Becca was born, but she'd learned that pointing this out only earned her concerned looks and whispered conversations about defensiveness and declining awareness. "The roads were fine," Maggie replied evenly. "Where's Michael?" "Oh, he's dealing with a work emergency. You know how it is during the holidays. Everything becomes urgent." Becca's laugh had an edge to it. Come in. Let me take your bag." The house smelled of cinnamon and pine, layered over something else, a chemical cleanness that suggested recent, thorough scrubbing. The living room had been transformed into a holiday showcase, every surface arranged with the precision of a magazine spread. It was beautiful and utterly devoid of the comfortable chaos that had characterized their Christmases when the children were younger. "Mom?" Michael appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. His greeting was warmer than his wife's, but Maggie noticed how his eyes didn't quite meet hers. "Good to see you." The hug he offered was genuine but brief, and she caught the quick glance he exchanged with Becca over her head, a look that spoke of previously discussed plans and shared understanding. "Where are the kids?" Maggie asked, setting down her purse and looking around expectantly. "Emma's at the mall with friends. Last-minute Christmas shopping, you know how teenagers are. Jake's upstairs working on a project." Becca's voice carried that bright, explanatory tone people used when they'd rehearsed their answers. "They'll be so excited to see you at dinner." "About that," Michael interjected, and Maggie caught another of those meaningful looks between husband and wife. "We've got you set up downstairs, the basement guest room. We had it renovated last year, much more private and comfortable. Maggie had heard about the renovation in passing, but she'd assumed it was for Michael's home office or perhaps a playroom for the children. A guest room in the basement seemed an odd investment, especially when the house had 2 perfectly good bedrooms upstairs. "That sounds lovely," she said, though something cold settled in her stomach. "I'd love to see what you've done with it." Becca led the way downstairs, her voice taking on that tour guide quality that meant she was managing a situation rather than simply showing family around. "We really went all out. New carpeting, fresh paint, even a small bathroom down here. You'll have complete privacy." The basement had indeed been transformed, but as Maggie stepped into the space designated as her accommodation, she understood why privacy had been emphasized. The room was clean and adequately furnished, but it was clearly meant to be separate from the main house. A fold-out couch served as the bed, flanked by a small dresser and a card table that presumably functioned as a desk. The single window sat high on the wall, offering a view of snow-covered ground at eye level. Most telling was the temperature. While the upstairs had been warm and welcoming, the basement carried a chill that spoke of minimal heating and poor insulation. "I hope it's comfortable enough," Becca said, though her tone suggested this was the best that could be expected under the circumstances. "Michael thought you'd appreciate the quiet. You know how loud the kids can get, and at your age." She let the sentence trail off, but the implication hung in the air. "At your age, you need rest. At your age, you can't handle normal family noise. At your age, you should be grateful for whatever accommodation we provide." "It's fine," Maggie replied, though fine was hardly the word she'd have chosen. Deliberate was more accurate. Calculated. This wasn't a guest room. It was a containment strategy. After Becca retreated upstairs with promises of coffee and catching up properly, Maggie sat on the fold-out couch and surveyed her temporary prison. The cheerful explanations couldn't disguise what was happening. She was being isolated, tucked away from the family gathering like an embarrassing relative who couldn't be trusted with normal social interaction. The sound of voices drifted down from above, animated conversation and laughter that emphasized her exclusion. She could make out Becca's voice, bright and energetic, discussing dinner preparations with someone. Michael's deeper tones added occasional comments, but there was a tension in the rhythm of their exchange that suggested ongoing negotiation rather than casual conversation. Maggie opened her laptop and connected to the Wi-Fi network she'd helped them set up 2 years ago. Thompson Family 2021. The password was Emma's birthday followed by the year they'd installed the system. At the time, Michael had been grateful for her technical expertise. "Mom, you're amazing with this stuff. I had no idea you knew so much about computers." She'd learned out of necessity after Robert's death. Loneliness had driven her to online communities and forums where her librarian skills and natural curiosity had flourished. She'd discovered a talent for research, for understanding systems, for seeing patterns that others missed. What had started as a way to stay connected had evolved into genuine expertise. The network showed multiple connected devices throughout the house. She recognized the smart TV, the security system, the programmable thermostat, all components of the integrated home automation she'd designed for them. What they didn't know was that she'd retained administrative access to every system. She'd built in redundancies and backdoors that even a factory reset wouldn't eliminate, thinking at the time that it would be helpful if they ever needed technical support. Now, reviewing the network traffic logs with practiced efficiency, she began to see patterns that made her stomach tighten. The security cameras she'd installed for their safety had been active far more frequently than normal family life would warrant. Motion sensors showed regular activity in every room except the one directly above her current location, Michael's study, where family discussions apparently took place away from the rest of the house. Most damning was the internet search history from Becca's devices. Page after page of research into assisted living facilities, elder care options, and real estate market analysis for properties in her neighborhood. The searches weren't recent or casual. They formed a months-long pattern of systematic investigation into disposing of an inconvenient relative. Maggie closed the laptop and sat in the sudden silence of the basement, the weight of realization settling over her like a physical thing. This wasn't poor hospitality or thoughtless accommodation. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to make her so uncomfortable, so aware of her unwelcome status, that she'd accept whatever solution they presented as inevitable. The voices upstairs had quieted, replaced by the kind of hushed conversation that meant serious discussion. She caught fragments through the heating vents. Making progress. And, sooner than expected. And most chilling of all, if she'd just cooperate. 27 years of marriage to Robert had taught her to trust her instincts, and every instinct was screaming that she was in danger. Not physical danger. Michael would never hurt her deliberately. But the kind of insidious, systematic erosion of autonomy that happened to inconvenient elderly relatives every day. She thought of her house in Cedar Rapids, the place she'd shared with Robert for 35 years. The garden they'd planted together, the kitchen where she'd taught the children to bake cookies, the study where she'd spent countless hours researching family genealogy and mastering new technologies. It wasn't just her home, it was her identity, her independence, her connection to the life she'd built, and they were planning to take it away. The realization should have left her feeling helpless, trapped in this basement room while her family plotted her future upstairs. Instead, as she powered up her laptop again and began accessing the security feeds with newfound purpose, Maggie Thompson felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years of widowhood. The satisfaction of having an advantage her opponents didn't know existed. They thought they were dealing with a confused, lonely old woman who could be managed and manipulated. They had no idea they'd just declared war on someone who controlled every electronic system in their house, had decades of research experience, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Maggie's fingers moved across the keyboard with the precision of a surgeon, muscle memory guiding her through network protocols she'd mastered during countless late nights after Robert's death. The basement's chill had settled into her bones, but her mind burned with focused intensity as she systematically dismantled her family's digital privacy. The security camera system revealed its secrets first. Months of archived footage painted a picture more damning than she'd imagined. There was Michael pacing the kitchen while Becca gestured emphatically, her mouth forming words that the audio pickup captured with crystal clarity. "She's not going to just volunteer for assisted living. Michael, we need to make her want to leave." The timestamp showed early November, 6 weeks of planning. Another clip from 2 weeks ago showed Becca at the kitchen table, laptop open, surrounded by printed brochures. The camera angle was perfect. Maggie could read the headers: Sunset Manor Assisted Living, Golden Years Care Community, Memory Care Solutions. The irony wasn't lost on her that the security system she'd installed to protect them was now documenting their betrayal. But it was the financial research that made her hands shake with rage. Becca's browsing history revealed systematic investigation into Maggie's assets. Real estate websites showed recent property valuations for her Cedar Rapids home, $340,000, nearly double what she'd paid 30 years ago. Insurance policy searches, investment account inquiries, even cemetery plot pricing as if they were already planning her funeral. The most chilling discovery was a folder on Michael's computer titled Mom's Transition. Inside were documents that took her breath away. Power of attorney forms with forged signatures, assisted living facility applications already partially completed, and a real estate agent's preliminary assessment of her house's market potential. They weren't just planning to manipulate her into assisted living, they were planning to forge her consent. Her phone buzzed, a text from Pat Morrison, her neighbor and closest friend. "How's Christmas going, dear? The house looks so quiet without..." You. The simple message nearly broke her composure. Pat would be spending Christmas alone, probably watching old movies and eating frozen dinners, while Maggie sat imprisoned in this basement, discovering the depth of her own family's betrayal. She typed back, "Interesting developments. Will call tomorrow." The response came immediately. "Everything all right? You sound odd." Even through text messages, Pat could read her moods. 40 years of friendship had created an intuitive connection that her own son apparently lacked, or chose to ignore. Maggie returned to her digital investigation, pulling up email logs that painted an even darker picture. Messages between Becca and someone named Dr. Patricia Hendricks, apparently a geriatric psychiatrist, discussing evaluation procedures and cognitive assessment protocols. The doctor's responses were professional but cooperative, suggesting this wasn't her first encounter with families seeking to prove elderly relatives incompetent. The final piece of evidence was a text thread between Becca and her sister in California. "Operation Basement is working perfectly. She looks miserable and confused down there. Michael's finally seeing that she can't live independently anymore. Should have this wrapped up by New Year's." The response: "About time. Mom went through the same thing with Grandma. These old people just don't know when to let go." Maggie sat back, the laptop screen glowing in the dim basement light. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. She was Operation Basement, a problem to be solved, an inconvenience to be managed. The grandmother who had co-signed their mortgage, who had provided free childcare for years, who had helped Emma with homework and taught Jake to identify. Birds in the backyard had been reduced to a strategic obstacle. Above her, footsteps crossed the kitchen floor. The murmur of voices suggested they were preparing dinner, the family meal she was apparently not invited to join. The exclusion was deliberate, designed to reinforce her outsider status and make her grateful for whatever scraps of attention they eventually offered. Her phone rang. Emma's contact photo filled the screen, a candid shot from last summer when they'd gone to the farmer's market together, both of them laughing at some shared joke. The girl in the photo looked genuinely happy, uncomplicated by the family dynamics that now poisoned every interaction. "Grandma?" Emma's voice was cautious, almost whispered. "Are you okay down there? Mom said you were resting, but..." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just getting settled in." "The basement's pretty cold, isn't it? I told Dad we should have put you in the guest room upstairs, but Mom said the stairs might be too difficult for you." There was a pause. "That seemed weird, since you climb those stairs to my room all the time when you visit." Even the children could see through the lie. Emma's discomfort was palpable, her natural compassion conflicting with her parents' narrative about her declining grandmother. "Don't worry about me, Emma. I'm tougher than I look." "I know you are. That's what makes this so..." Another pause. "Grandma, are you sure you're okay? Really okay?" The question carried layers of meaning. Emma wasn't just asking about her physical comfort. She was asking about everything. The basement exile, the strange family dynamics, the whispered conversations. That stopped when children entered the room. "I'm figuring some things out," Maggie said carefully. "But I want you to know that whatever happens, you and Jake are the most important things in my life. Nothing will ever change that." "What do..." "You mean whatever happens?" Emma's voice sharpened with concern. Before Maggie could answer, she heard Becca's voice in the background. "Emma, who are you talking to? Come help with dinner." "I have to go," Emma whispered. "But Grandma, if you need anything at all, just text me, okay?" The line went dead, leaving Maggie alone with her discoveries and her growing anger. They thought they could manipulate her, isolate her, and forge her signature on documents that would strip away her autonomy. They thought she was just another confused, elderly woman who could be managed and controlled. They had no idea that the woman they were trying to manipulate had spent the last 3 years becoming an expert in digital forensics, network security, and electronic surveillance. They didn't know that she had administrative access to every system in their house, complete records of their communications, and enough evidence of their fraud to destroy their carefully constructed lives. Most importantly, they didn't understand that isolation could be a weapon that cut both ways. They had separated her from the family gathering, but they had also given her uninterrupted access to their digital infrastructure and complete privacy to plan her response. As the sounds of family dinner drifted down from above, laughter and conversation she was deliberately excluded from, Maggie began to plan her counterattack. They wanted to make her uncomfortable, to convince her that she couldn't manage independent living. She was about to show them exactly how uncomfortable a truly independent woman could make their lives. The dinner invitation came at 7:30, delivered by Jake with the uncomfortable formality of a reluctant messenger. He stood at the bottom of the basement stairs, his 13-year-old frame silhouetted against the warm light from above, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mom says dinner's ready," he announced, then added more quietly, "She made your favorite, pot roast." Maggie closed her laptop with deliberate care. The irony wasn't lost on her that Becca had prepared her favorite meal while simultaneously researching ways to strip her of her independence. It was manipulation wrapped in the guise of thoughtfulness, a performance designed to make her feel guilty for any resistance to their plans. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "That was very thoughtful of her," Maggie replied, rising from the uncomfortable fold-out couch. "I'll be right up." The dining room had been transformed into a holiday tableau, complete with her grandmother's china and the silver service Robert had given her for their 20th anniversary. The sight of her own possessions, items she'd loaned them years ago and never seen returned, being used to stage this false celebration added another layer to her growing fury. "Maggie, you look rested," Becca said with that bright, overenthusiastic tone she used when performing concern. "I hope the basement wasn't too chilly. Michael keeps meaning to check the heating down there." Michael nodded absently, focused on carving the roast with unnecessary precision. His discomfort was palpable, the kind of rigid concentration that came from avoiding eye contact and difficult conversations. Emma looked up from her phone with a quick smile that didn't quite mask her concern. She'd been watching Maggie carefully. Since her arrival, those observant teenage eyes cataloging the family dynamics with uncomfortable accuracy. "The temperature is manageable," Maggie replied evenly, taking the seat at the foot of the table, notably separated from the family cluster at the head. Another deliberate choice designed to emphasize her outsider status. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in superficial pleasantries. Becca dominated the discussion with updates about her book club and the neighborhood association, carefully steering away from any topics that might require genuine engagement with Maggie's thoughts or experiences. Michael contributed occasional comments about work stress and holiday obligations, his tone carrying the weary resignation of someone fulfilling duties rather than enjoying family time. Midway through the meal, Maggie excused herself to use the bathroom. Instead, she slipped into Michael's study and accessed the smart home control panel she'd installed 2 years ago. Her fingers moved quickly across the interface, implementing the first phase of her technological rebellion. She returned to the dinner table just as Becca was launching into a story about the Christmas pageant at their church. The performance continued for another 20 minutes before the first signs of disruption became apparent. "Is it just me? Or did the Wi-Fi go down?" Emma asked, staring at her phone with growing frustration. "I can't get any of my apps to load." Michael pulled out his own device, frowning at the connection bars. "Mine's not working either. Maybe it's a service outage." Becca's perfectly composed expression flickered with annoyance. She'd been subtly photographing the dinner throughout the meal, candid shots designed to document their loving family Christmas for social media. The inability to upload her carefully curated content was clearly disrupting her evening's agenda. "I'm sure it's temporary," Maggie offered mildly. "These things happen during the holidays. High network traffic, you know." What they didn't know was that she'd changed the Wi-Fi password from Emma's birthday to a string of characters that would take them hours to guess. Operation Basement, T23. A private joke that would become significantly less amusing if they ever figured it out. The technological disruption escalated throughout the evening. The smart TV began cycling through channels randomly, interrupting their attempt to watch a Christmas movie. The programmable thermostat started fluctuating wildly, making the house alternately stifling and frigid. The smart speakers activated without prompting, playing brief snippets of songs before cutting off mid-verse. "This is ridiculous," Becca muttered, stalking through the house and jabbing at various control panels. Everything was working fine this morning. Michael had called their internet service provider twice, only to be told that their connection was functioning normally. The customer service representative suggested rebooting their router and checking for system updates. Standard troubleshooting that would accomplish nothing since the problems originated from within their own network. "Maybe we should call Tom." "Bradley," Emma suggested. "He fixed the Johnsons' computer problems last month." "Grandma, didn't you say you knew him from the community center?" Maggie felt a flicker of warmth at the mention of Tom's name. He was a retired IT specialist who'd been helping seniors with technology issues, and their friendship had developed over several months of shared coffee and computer tutorials. More importantly, he was someone outside the family who might serve as both witness and ally if the situation escalated. "Tom's very knowledgeable," Maggie agreed, "though I'm sure this is just a temporary glitch." The glitches continued through the evening with increasing sophistication. Lights flickered in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. The garage door opened and closed randomly, setting off the security system's motion detectors. The smart doorbell began recording phantom visitors, sending notifications to their phones about movement that surveillance footage couldn't verify. Jake, who had been quietly observing the chaos, finally spoke up. "This is like when our old house had electrical problems, except weirder. It's like the house is trying to tell us something." His innocent observation carried more truth than he realized. The house was indeed trying to tell them something, that the woman they'd relegated to the basement wasn't as helpless as they'd assumed. By 10 o'clock, Becca's composure had cracked completely. Her attempts to document their perfect family Christmas had been thwarted by technological failures that seemed to target her every effort at social media presentation. Her Instagram story remained frustratingly blank, her Facebook updates wouldn't post, and even her text messages to friends were failing to send. "This is impossible," she snapped, throwing her phone onto the kitchen counter. "It's like the whole house is broken." Emma caught Maggie's eye across the room, and for a moment, understanding flickered between them. The teenager's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching awe as she began to piece together the timing of the malfunctions with her grandmother's movements throughout the house. "Grandma," Emma said carefully, "you installed most of these systems, didn't you?" "I helped with the initial setup," Maggie replied with studied innocence. "Technology can be so unpredictable sometimes." The look that passed between grandmother and granddaughter carried the weight of recognition. Emma was bright enough to see the patterns, sophisticated enough to understand what they meant, and moral enough to feel a growing appreciation for the poetic justice unfolding around them. As the family finally gave up their efforts to restore normal function and began preparing for bed, Maggie returned to her basement exile with quiet satisfaction. The first battle had been won through confusion and frustration rather than direct confrontation, a subtle demonstration of power that left her opponents uncertain about what they were fighting. Above her, she could hear heated whispers between Michael and Becca, the kind of urgent, low-voiced argument that suggested strain in their unified front. The technological chaos had disrupted more than their internet connection. It had begun to crack the calm facade they needed to maintain their manipulation. Tomorrow would bring escalation, but tonight belonged to the satisfaction of watching her family's carefully orchestrated Christmas dissolve into digital chaos. They had tried to make her feel powerless and isolated. Instead, they had given her complete control over their environment and the privacy to use it strategically. The woman they thought they could manipulate had just demonstrated that she held all the real power in their relationship. And this was only the beginning. Christmas morning arrived with the artificial cheer of a family determined to maintain normalcy despite the previous evening's technological chaos. Maggie woke to the sound of muffled voices upstairs, Michael's apologetic tones mixing with Becca's sharp instructions about making the best of things and not letting technical difficulties ruin Christmas. The irony wasn't lost on her that they were discussing damage control while she lay in the basement, the architect of their difficulties listening to every word through the heating vents she'd mapped months ago during the system installation. She dressed carefully, choosing the soft blue sweater Emma had given her last year, and the pearl earrings Robert had surprised her with on their final Christmas together. If today was going to bring confrontation, she would meet it looking like the dignified woman she was, not the confused elderly relative they were trying to construct. The house systems had remained mercifully quiet overnight, a strategic pause that would make the family hope their problems were resolved while keeping them on edge about potential recurrence. Maggie had learned patience during 4 decades of research, and she understood that the most effective campaigns were built on unpredictability rather than constant assault. She was reviewing security footage on her laptop when footsteps descended the basement stairs, light, tentative steps that could only belong to Emma. The 16-year-old appeared at the bottom of the staircase, her expression carrying the careful determination of someone who'd been building courage for this conversation. "Grandma?" Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" "Of course, sweetheart. Come sit with me." Emma perched on the edge of the fold-out couch, her hands twisted in her lap. For several moments, she seemed to struggle with how to begin, her teenage certainty warring with the complexity of challenging her parents' version of reality. "The Wi-Fi thing last night," she finally said. "That wasn't random, was it?" Maggie studied her granddaughter's face, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, the stubborn chin she'd inherited from Robert, the moral courage that had always been Emma's defining characteristic. This was the moment that would determine whether she had an ally or another obstacle. "What do you think?" Maggie asked gently. "I think you know a lot more about our computer systems than Mom and Dad realize. I think you heard them talking about putting you in assisted living, and I think you're not going to just let that happen." Emma's voice gained strength as she spoke. "And I think they have no idea who they're messing with." The pride that swelled in Maggie's chest was almost overwhelming. Her granddaughter had seen through the manipulation, understood the stakes, and chosen to seek the truth rather than accept comfortable lies. "You're very perceptive," Maggie said carefully. "What else do you think?" "I think they've been planning this for months. The basement room, the weird comments about your memory, the way Mom keeps mentioning how difficult it must be for you to maintain your house." Emma's eyes flashed with anger. "I think they're trying to steal your life, and they're using your age as an excuse." Before Maggie could respond, they heard lighter footsteps on the stairs. Jake appeared, carrying a rolled-up piece of paper and wearing the serious expression that meant he'd been thinking hard about something important. "Emma? Grandma?" He looked between them uncertainly. "Are you having a secret meeting?" Emma glanced at Maggie, then made a decision that spoke to her maturity. "Kind of. Want to join us?" Jake settled on the floor beside the couch, unrolling his paper to reveal a detailed pencil sketch. It showed their family from last Christmas, all of them gathered around the tree in Maggie's living room, faces bright with genuine laughter. The detail was remarkable. capturing not just their appearances but the warmth and connection that had characterized their relationship before this year's artificial distance. "I drew this from memory," Jake said quietly. "I keep thinking about it because everyone looks so happy. But this year feels different, and I don't understand why." He looked up at Maggie with confusion and hurt. "Mom and Dad keep saying you're getting confused and need help, but you seem exactly the same to me. Actually, you seem sadder, but not confused." The observation hit Maggie like a physical blow. Her 13-year-old grandson had articulated what the adults were refusing to acknowledge, that her supposed decline was actually grief and isolation, not cognitive failure. "Jake," she said gently, "what if I told you that some adults sometimes say things that aren't true because they want something they can't ask for directly?" "You mean like lying?" "Like lying, but they convince themselves it's for a good reason." Emma leaned forward, her voice tight with controlled anger. "They want your house, don't they? And your money. That's what all this is about." The blunt assessment hung in the basement air like a challenge. Maggie looked at her grandchildren, Emma's righteous fury and Jake's bewildered hurt, and made a decision that would change everything. "Yes," she said simply. "They do." Jake's face crumpled. "But why? We're family. Families are supposed to take care of each other." "Real families do," Emma said fiercely. "But Mom and Dad are acting like people who see me as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved," Maggie finished gently. The three of them sat in silence, processing the weight of that admission. Finally, Emma spoke up, her voice carrying a determination that reminded Maggie powerfully of her younger self. "So what are we going to do about it?" "We?" Maggie asked. "Jake and I aren't going to just watch them do this to you. Are we, Jake?" Jake shook his head emphatically. "The basement is cold and dark, and you shouldn't have to stay down here like you're being punished. It's not fair." Looking at her grandchildren's faces, fierce with loyalty and burning with justice, Maggie felt something she hadn't experienced since Robert's death. The powerful certainty that she wasn't alone. "If we're going to work together," she said, carefully, "you need to understand that this might get very difficult. Your parents aren't going to be happy when they realize what's happening." "They're not happy now," Emma pointed out. "They're just pretending to be happy while they plan to get rid of you." "And they put you in the basement during Christmas," Jake added, his young voice carrying an indignation that spoke to his inherent sense of fairness. "That's mean." Maggie opened her laptop and turned the screen toward them. "Then let me show you what I've learned about their plans." For the next hour, she walked them through the evidence she'd gathered. The security footage, the financial research, the assisted living inquiries, the forged documents. Emma's technical knowledge helped her understand the sophistication of Maggie's investigation, while Jake's artist's eye caught details in the surveillance footage that revealed the calculated nature of their parents' deception. "This is like a spy movie," Jake whispered, awed despite his anger. "Except the villains are Mom and Dad," Emma said grimly. "So what's our next move?" Emma asked, and Maggie felt a surge of affection for her granddaughter's immediate shift into strategic thinking. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message. The number wasn't in her contacts, but the message made her heart race. "Mom, I've been trying to call, but it goes straight to voicemail. Decided to drive out for Christmas after all. Should be there by noon. Can't wait to see everyone. Dan." Maggie stared at the screen, her mind reeling. Dan, her younger son, the software engineer who'd moved to Seattle partly to escape family drama, was coming home. Becca had told her he was spending Christmas with his partner's family, too busy to visit. Another lie, designed to ensure Maggie's isolation during their manipulation. "What is it?" Emma asked, noticing her expression. "Your Uncle Dan is coming. Home for Christmas. He'll be here in a few hours." Emma's face lit up. "Uncle Dan? But Mom said he couldn't make it." "Your mother says a lot of things that aren't true," Maggie replied, her strategic mind already working through the implications. Dan's unexpected arrival would shatter their carefully controlled narrative. More importantly, he had the technical expertise to understand exactly what she'd been doing, and the moral character to support her. The sound of footsteps upstairs indicated the family was stirring, preparing for their performance of Christmas morning joy. Soon they would call her up for present opening, another staged event designed to reinforce her position as grateful recipient of their charity rather than beloved family matriarch. "We need to be very careful," Maggie told her co-conspirators. "They can't know we've talked about this until we're ready to act. Can you do that?" Both children nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of the secret they now shared. "Good. Then let's go upstairs and let them think everything is normal. But remember, you're not alone in this anymore, and neither am I." As they climbed the basement stairs together, Maggie felt the balance of power shifting beneath her feet. What had started as a lonely woman's desperate fight for independence had become a multi-generational alliance bound by love and justice. The family who thought they could manipulate her had no idea that their victims had just become their opposition. And with Dan's imminent arrival, their carefully constructed plan was about to face its first real test. The technological warfare had been just the opening move. The real battle was about to begin. The Christmas morning performance was well underway when Dan's text arrived. Maggie sat in her designated corner chair, not coincidentally the least comfortable seat in the living room, watching her family orchestrate what she now recognized as an elaborate piece of theater. Every gift exchange was calculated, every smile measured, every gesture designed to reinforce the narrative of a loving family, caring for their increasingly fragile matriarch. Becca had outdone herself with the staging. She'd given Maggie a collection of memory-stimulating puzzle books and a pill organizer with the days of the week clearly labeled, gifts that seemed thoughtful while subtly reinforcing the idea of cognitive decline. Michael's contribution was a subscription to a meal delivery service to make cooking easier, accompanied by concerned comments about nutrition and the challenges of maintaining a proper diet while living alone. Only the children's gifts carried genuine affection. Emma had chosen a beautiful silk scarf in Maggie's favorite shade of blue, while Jake had created a hand-drawn family tree that traced their genealogy back 4 generations, a project that clearly drew on knowledge Maggie had shared during their many conversations about family history. "This is incredible work, Jake," Maggie said, studying the intricate detail of his artwork. "You remembered everything I told you about great-grandfather Thompson's immigration from Ireland." "I like learning about our family," Jake said simply. "It makes me feel connected to everyone, even the people I never met." The innocent comment carried an edge that made Becca shift uncomfortably. Connection was the last thing she wanted Maggie to feel. Isolation was crucial to her plan's success. It was during this careful choreography that Maggie's phone buzzed with Dan's message. She read it with careful neutrality, aware that Emma and Jake were watching her with the heightened awareness of conspirators. "Everything all right, Mom?" Michael asked, noticing her attention to the phone. "Just a Christmas message from a friend," Maggie replied smoothly. "Nothing important." But Emma had caught the slight smile that touched her grandmother's lips, and Jake had noticed the way Maggie's posture straightened slightly. The children understood that something significant had just shifted in their favor. 20 minutes later, the sound of a car in the driveway interrupted Becca's monologue about the importance of family traditions. She paused mid-sentence, her expression flickering with confusion. "Are we expecting someone?" Michael asked, moving toward the window. The confusion turned to alarm when Dan's familiar Toyota Prius came into view, packed with luggage and Christmas gifts. Michael's face went pale while Becca's carefully composed expression cracked completely. "I thought you said Dan couldn't make it," Emma said, her voice carrying just enough innocence to mask the accusation underneath. He said, "There must have been a change in plans," Becca stammered, her mind clearly racing through the implications of this unexpected variable. Dan emerged from the car, looking exactly like what he was. A successful software engineer who'd driven 12 hours through a snowstorm because something in his mother's recent communications had triggered his protective instincts. At 40, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned to trust his judgment and act on his convictions. His embrace with Maggie was genuine and warm, unmarked by the performative quality that characterized the rest of the family's interactions. "Mom, you look good. A little tired maybe, but good." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just surprised to see you. I thought you were spending Christmas in Seattle." "Change of plans," Dan replied, his eyes scanning the room and cataloging the obvious. Tension. "Marcus couldn't travel because of work, so I decided to come home instead. Hope that's okay." The question was directed at Michael and Becca, but the tone suggested it wasn't really a question at all. Dan had come home for Christmas, and their approval was irrelevant to that fact. "Of course it's okay," Michael said quickly, though his discomfort was palpable. "We're thrilled to have you. It's just, we weren't expecting." "The guest room upstairs is available," Dan said, setting down his bags. "Unless there's some reason it wouldn't be?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Dan had clearly noticed that his mother was staying in the basement while the upstairs guest room remained mysteriously unavailable for the family matriarch, but apparently accessible for the unexpected son. "Actually," Becca said, scrambling to regain control of the narrative, "your mother specifically requested the basement room. She said she preferred the privacy and quiet." Dan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. He'd inherited his mother's ability to read people and situations, and he was clearly reading this one with growing concern. "Is that right, Mom?" he asked gently. "You requested the basement?" The moment crystallized everything. Maggie could maintain the polite fiction, preserve the family peace, and continue to endure her exile in the name of avoiding conflict. Or she could trust that her son had come home because he'd sensed something was wrong, and that he was offering her the chance to tell the truth. "Not exactly," she said quietly. "I was told it was the only available option." The silence that followed was electric with tension. Dan's gaze moved between his brother and sister-in-law, his expression hardening as he processed the implications of what he was hearing. "I see," he said finally. "And this was because at her age, the stairs can be challenging," Becca said quickly, "and the noise from the children's rooms might disturb her sleep. We were thinking of her comfort. Dan's voice was carefully neutral, but anyone who knew him recognized the tone that preceded his most devastating technical arguments. "In the basement, during Christmas, while the rest of the family stays upstairs." "Dan," Michael said uncomfortably, "you don't understand the situation? Then explain it to me." The challenge was direct and unavoidable. Michael looked to his wife for support, but Becca was clearly struggling to construct a response that would satisfy Dan's probing questions without revealing the true nature of their plans. It was Emma who broke the stalemate, her 16-year-old, voice cutting through the adult tension with devastating clarity. "Uncle Dan, they want to put Grandma in assisted living. They've been researching facilities and talking about selling her house. They put her in the basement to make her uncomfortable so she'd agree to move." The statement dropped into the room like a bomb. Becca's face went white, Michael made a strangled sound of protest, and Jake looked between his parents with growing understanding of the forces that had been shaping his family's dynamics. Dan's expression didn't change, but his voice carried a new edge. "Is this true?" "Emma, you don't understand what you're talking about," Becca said sharply. "Your grandmother's needs are complex, and sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions." "I understand perfectly," Emma interrupted, her teenage defiance blazing. "I understand that you've been lying to us, manipulating Grandma, and trying to steal her independence. And I understand that you didn't invite Uncle Dan because you knew he'd stop you." The accusation hung in the air like a confession. Dan's gaze moved to his mother, and she saw recognition dawn in his eyes. Not just of the immediate situation, but of the systematic campaign that had brought them to this point. "Mom," he said gently, "what's really been happening here?" And in that moment, surrounded by her grandchildren's fierce loyalty and her younger son's protective concern, Maggie made the decision that would change everything. "Let me show you," she said, reaching for her laptop. "I think it's time everyone understood exactly what's been going on." The technological rebellion had been preparation. The gathering of evidence had been strategy. But this was the moment when the war moved from the shadows into the light, and the family that had tried to manipulate her discovered that they were facing not just their victim, but an alliance of people who refused to stand by and watch injustice unfold. Dan's arrival had shifted the balance of power completely. The question now wasn't whether Maggie could resist their plans, but whether Michael and Becca could survive the exposure of what they'd been doing. The real battle was about to begin. The living room fell silent as Maggie opened her laptop, the screen's glow reflecting off faces that ranged from anticipation to dread. Dan moved to stand behind her chair, his software engineer's eye immediately recognizing the sophisticated network monitoring interface she'd constructed. "Holy shit, Mom," he breathed, then caught himself. "Sorry, but this is professional grade. Surveillance work?" "Language, Daniel," Becca said automatically, though her voice lacked its usual authority. She was staring at the laptop screen with growing alarm, beginning to understand that the confused elderly woman they'd been manipulating had capabilities they'd never imagined. "No, let him swear," Emma said fiercely. "This deserves swearing." Maggie began with the security footage, methodically walking through months of recorded conversations. The family watched in stunned silence as their own voices filled the room, discussing assisted living facilities, property valuations, and strategies for convincing Maggie she was no longer capable of independent living. "November 15th, Maggie said, advancing to a particularly damning clip. "This is you, Becca, explaining to Michael that I needed to be made uncomfortable enough to want to leave." Aunt Becca's voice echoed from the speakers with crystalline clarity. "She's not going to just volunteer for assisted living, Michael. We need to make her want to leave. The basement room will be perfect, cold, isolated, just uncomfortable enough to make her realize she can't handle living alone anymore." Michael's face had gone ashen. "Mom, I can explain." "Can you?" Dan's voice was ice cold. "Can you explain conspiring to psychologically manipulate our mother? Can you explain researching ways to have her declared incompetent?" The laptop screen now showed Becca's browsing history, months of searches for elderly competency laws, power of attorney requirements, and convincing aging parents to move to care facilities. Each search was time-stamped, creating an undeniable timeline of premeditation. "This is a systematic campaign," Dan continued, his technical mind processing the evidence with devastating efficiency. "You've been documenting everything, haven't you, Mom? Building a case." "I'm a librarian," Maggie said simply. "Research is what I do." Jake had been studying his father's face throughout the revelations, and his young voice cut through the tension with heartbreaking directness. "Dad, why would you want to hurt Grandma?" The question shattered Michael's remaining composure. His face crumpled, and for the first time since Maggie's arrival, she saw genuine remorse in her elder son's expression. "I didn't. We weren't trying to hurt her," he said weakly. "We thought. Becca said it would be better for everyone if she had professional care." "Professional care she doesn't need," Dan said flatly. "Mom, show me the financial research." The next series of screenshots revealed the depth of Becca's investigation into Maggie's assets. Property values, investment accounts, insurance policies, a complete financial profile that painted a clear picture of the substantial inheritance at stake. $340,000, Dan read from the real estate evaluation. That's what her house is worth now, plus her savings, investments, and insurance. That's quite a motivation for manufactured concern about her welfare. Emma had been unusually quiet during the financial revelations, but now she spoke up with the moral clarity that had always been her defining characteristic. "You were going to steal her life," she said, looking directly at her mother. "Not just her money, her life, her independence, her home, her right to make her own choices. You were going to take everything that made her who she is." "Emma, you don't understand how complicated these situations can be," Becca said desperately. "Sometimes families have to make difficult decisions." "This wasn't a family decision," Dan interrupted. "This was fraud. Mom, did they show you any of these documents? Did they ask for your input on assisted living facilities? Did they discuss their concerns about your capabilities directly with you?" Maggie shook her head. "Everything was done behind my back. I learned about it through surveillance of my own family." The weight of that statement settled over the room. Even Jake seemed to understand the profound betrayal it represented, that a grandmother had been forced to spy on her own children to discover their plans for her future. "But Mom," Michael said, grasping for some justification, "you have to admit that maintaining the house is getting harder. The yard work, the maintenance, the isolation. Have you asked her about that?" Dan's voice was sharp. "Have you offered to help with maintenance? Have you suggested solutions that don't involve stripping her of her autonomy?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "I've been handling my own affairs for 67 years, Maggie said quietly. "I maintained that house and raised two children while working full-time. I learned computer programming in my 60s and set up the smart home system you're all using. I'm handling my finances, my health care, and my daily life without assistance. The only thing I couldn't handle was discovering that my own family was conspiring against me." Dan had been reviewing the laptop's file structure while they talked, his technical expertise allowing him to understand the scope of his mother's digital investigation. "Mom, this is incredible work. You've documented everything: communications, financial research, legal consultations. You've built an airtight case for elder abuse." "Elder abuse?" Becca's voice cracked. "That's ridiculous. We're her family. We love her." "Love doesn't manipulate," Emma said fiercely. "Love doesn't lie and scheme and put people in basements to make them feel unwanted." "Love certainly doesn't forge signatures on power of attorney documents," Dan added, pulling up another file. "Because that's what this is, isn't it? A legal document with Mom's signature that she never signed. The forged power of attorney appeared on the screen, and even Michael seemed shocked by the evidence of outright fraud. "Becca, you didn't tell me about this." "It was just, we needed to be prepared," Becca said weakly, "in case she became truly incompetent." "Incompetent? According to whom?" Dan's voice was building toward real anger now. "According to your manufactured evidence? According to your deliberate isolation and psychological manipulation?" The doorbell rang, interrupting the confrontation. Through the front window, they could see a familiar figure on the porch, Tom Bradley, carrying what appeared to be a toolbox and looking concerned. "That's Tom," Maggie said. "He must have gotten my message." "What message?" Becca asked sharply. "The one I sent last night asking him to come check the Wi-Fi issues this morning." Maggie's smile was small but satisfied. "I thought we might need a witness to what's been happening here." Dan grinned, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him since his arrival. "Mom, you're absolutely brilliant. You've been building a case and gathering allies." As Michael went to answer the door, Emma moved closer to her grandmother's chair. "Grandma, what happens now?" "Now we find out who in this family is committed to love and honesty," Maggie replied, "and who's committed to manipulation and fraud." Tom's arrival would bring an outside perspective to the family implosion, but more importantly, it would provide technical expertise that could amplify the digital evidence Maggie had so carefully gathered. The woman they'd tried to isolate had instead built a network of support that spanned generations and communities. The technological rebellion had evolved into something much more powerful, a coalition of people who refused to stand by while an elderly woman was systematically stripped of her dignity and independence. The war had moved beyond the smart home's digital infrastructure into the realm of public accountability, legal consequences, and moral reckonings. And for the first time since her arrival in the basement guest room, Maggie Thompson felt like she was winning. Tom Bradley's entrance into the chaos brought with it the steady presence of someone who'd seen enough family dysfunction in his 72 years to recognize a crisis when he walked into one. His weathered hands still carried the confidence of 4 decades in IT, and his eyes, kind but sharp, immediately assessed the tension crackling through the room. "Morning, folks," he said, setting down his toolbox with deliberate calm. "Maggie mentioned you were having some technical difficulties." The understatement was so profound that Emma actually snorted with laughter, quickly covering it with a cough when her mother shot her a warning look. "Tom, thank you for coming," Maggie said, her voice carrying warmth that had been absent from every other interaction that morning. "Though I suspect our problems are more complicated than simple technical issues." Tom's gaze swept the room, taking in Dan's protective stance behind his mother's chair, Emma and Jake's obvious distress, Michael's guilty posture, and Becca's barely contained panic. The laptop screen still displayed evidence of months of manipulation, and Tom's experienced eye caught enough details to understand the gravity of what he was witnessing. "I see," he said quietly. "Would you like me to come back later?" "Actually," Dan said, straightening to his full height, "I think you should stay. My mother could use a friend right now, and frankly, we could use an outside perspective on what's been happening here." Tom moved to Maggie's side, his presence immediately shifting the room's dynamics. He wasn't family, couldn't be manipulated, or guilted into silence, and his technical expertise made him a formidable ally in understanding the digital evidence. "Maggie's been showing us some concerning discoveries," Dan continued, his voice taking on the measured tone he used for client presentations. "Would you mind taking a look at what she's found?" As Tom reviewed the laptop screen, his expression grew increasingly grim. Years of helping seniors navigate technology had given him a deep understanding of elder abuse, and he recognized the systematic nature of what he was seeing. "This is sophisticated work," he said finally, his voice carrying professional admiration. "Maggie, you've documented everything. Network logs, communications, financial research, forged documents. This is more than evidence. This is a complete case file." "A case file for what?" Becca demanded, though her voice lacked its usual authority. "Elder abuse," Tom replied bluntly. "Financial exploitation, psychological manipulation, conspiracy to commit fraud. I've seen this pattern before, unfortunately. It usually starts with isolation and manufactured concerns about competency." Michael's composure finally cracked completely. The weight of seeing his actions classified as abuse, witnessed by a stranger, and supported by overwhelming evidence, broke through the rationalizations he'd been using to justify his complicity. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said, his voice breaking. "Becca said Mom was showing signs of decline, that she needed help but was too proud to ask for it. She said we needed to be proactive, to make decisions before Mom made poor choices that could hurt her." "What signs?" Dan's voice was sharp. "What specific signs of decline?" Michael looked helplessly between his wife and his mother, realizing he couldn't articulate a single concrete example of cognitive failure. The supposed decline had been constructed entirely from normal aging behaviors reframed as concerning. Symptoms. She seemed lonely," he said weakly. "Isolated. She stopped coming to family dinners as often." "Because you stopped inviting her," Emma said flatly. "I remember, Dad." Mom would say it was too much work to cook for extra people, or that Grandma might be tired, or that we should let her rest. You stopped inviting her and then used her absence as proof she was declining. The accuracy of Emma's observation hit Michael like a physical blow. His 16-year-old daughter had seen through the manipulation that he'd allowed himself to believe. And the financial research? Dan pressed. The assisted living facilities? The forged power of attorney? How do you explain those as concern? For her welfare? I didn't know about the forgery, Michael said quickly, looking at his wife with growing horror. Becca, you said you were just researching options, being prepared. I was being prepared, Becca snapped, her careful facade finally crumbling under the pressure. Someone had to think ahead, had to plan for the inevitable. She's 67 years old, living alone in a house that's too big for her, with no realistic plan for aging. We were being responsible. Responsible? Tom's voice carried decades of quiet authority. Responsible would be having an honest conversation about concerns. Responsible would be offering support while respecting autonomy. This is exploitation, disguised as care. Jake, who had been quietly absorbing the adult conversation with growing understanding, suddenly spoke up with the devastating honesty that only children possess. Mom, you lied to us about Uncle Dan not coming for Christmas. You lied about why Grandma had to stay in the basement. You lied about her being confused. His voice was small but clear. If you're lying about everything, how do we know you're telling the truth about anything? The question hung in the air like an indictment. Even Becca seemed to recognize that her 13-year-old son had identified the core issue. That systematic deception had destroyed the trust necessary for family relationships. Jake, adults sometimes have to make complicated decisions, she said desperately. You don't understand how difficult these situations can be. I understand that you put my grandmother in the basement during Christmas, Jake replied with devastating simplicity. And I understand that's wrong. The moral clarity of a child's perspective stripped away the elaborate justifications and revealed the situation for what it truly was. A cruel manipulation of an elderly woman by people who claimed to love her. Dan had been watching his brother throughout the confrontation, and now he spoke directly to Michael with the authority of someone who'd found his moral center. You have a choice to make right now, Michael. You can continue supporting Becca's manipulation, or you can start acting like Mom's son instead of her adversary. But you can't do both. The ultimatum crystallized everything. Michael looked around the room, at his mother's dignified strength, his daughter's fierce loyalty, his son's moral disappointment, his brother's protective anger, and his wife's exposed calculation. I'm sorry, he said finally, the words directed at Maggie but carrying the weight of complete capitulation. I'm so sorry, Mom. I let myself believe that we were helping you, but we were stealing your life. The admission broke something fundamental in Becca's composure. Faced with her husband's defection and the complete exposure of her plans, she made the desperate choice that confirmed everything her family had suspected about her true nature. Fine, she said, her voice turning cold and vicious. You want to know the truth? She's a burden. A lonely, stubborn old woman who's too proud to admit she can't handle independence anymore. That house is wasted on her. That money is sitting unused while our children need college funds, and we're struggling with mortgage payments. Someone needs to make realistic decisions about resource allocation. The mask had finally slipped completely. No more concern for Maggie's welfare, no more claims of family responsibility. Just raw entitlement and calculation, exposed for everyone to see. Emma stood up from her chair, her teenage dignity impressive in its intensity. Mom, that's the most disgusting thing I've ever heard you say. Grandma isn't a resource to be allocated. She's a person. She's our family. And she raised you, Jake added, his young voice carrying profound disappointment. She took care of you when you were little, and now you want to steal from her? Becca looked around the room, seeing only judgment and rejection. Her carefully constructed manipulation had not only failed, but had revealed her true character to everyone she'd been trying to control. I won't stay here and be attacked by my own family, she said, gathering what remained of her dignity. Michael, you can choose to support your wife and the mother of your children, or you can choose to enable your mother's stubborn refusal to face reality. But you can't have both. The ultimatum was clear, and Michael's response was immediate. Then I choose my mother, he said quietly. I choose honesty over manipulation. I choose love over greed. Becca's face went white with rage. If that's your choice, then I'm done. I'm taking the children and leaving, and I'll be filing for divorce. We'll see how much you love your precious mother when it costs you your marriage and half your assets. The children aren't going anywhere, Emma said firmly. I'm 16, old enough to choose where I live, and I choose to stay with people who tell the truth. So do I, Jake added, moving to stand beside his sister. I want to stay with Dad and Grandma. The complete collapse of Becca's support system, her husband's defection, her children's rejection, her manipulation exposed, left her isolated in a way that mirrored what she'd tried to inflict on Maggie. But where Maggie had responded with dignity and strategic thinking, Becca responded with threats and ultimatums. You'll regret this, she said, looking directly at Maggie. All of you will regret this. As she stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her, the room fell into stunned silence. The family that had gathered for Christmas morning had been fundamentally restructured in the space of a few hours. Tom was the first to speak, his voice gentle but firm. Maggie, you need to document everything that just happened. The threats, the admissions, the attempted manipulation. This isn't over. Dan nodded grimly. She's going to try to salvage something from this. We need to be prepared. But as Maggie looked around the room, at her younger son's protective strength, her elder son's moral awakening, her grandchildren's fierce loyalty, and her friends' steady support, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years of widowhood. She felt like she was home. The silence that followed Becca's departure carried the weight of seismic change. Michael sat heavily in his chair, looking like a man who'd just watched his entire worldview collapse. Emma and Jake flanked their grandmothers, chair-like protective sentinels, while Dan and Tom formed a secondary line of support that spoke to the new alliances emerging from the wreckage. What happens now? Jake asked quietly, his 13-year-old voice carrying the uncertainty of someone whose family structure had just been fundamentally altered. Now we rebuild, Maggie said simply. We figure out what a real family looks like when it's based on honesty instead of manipulation. Tom cleared his throat, his years of experience with family crises giving weight to his words. There are practical matters to consider: legal protections, documentation, ensuring this can't happen again. Dan nodded, his software engineer's mind already organizing the challenges ahead. Mom, you need a lawyer. What Becca did, the forged documents, the financial research, the systematic manipulation, that's criminal behavior, and her threats suggest she's not done. I know someone, Tom said. Sarah Chen specializes in elder law. She's handled cases like this before. Michael looked up from his contemplation, his face etched with exhaustion and remorse. I'll pay for the lawyer. It's the least I can do after. He couldn't finish the sentence, but the offer carried genuine contrition. We'll handle the costs together, Dan said firmly. This is about protecting Mom, not assigning blame for expenses. Emma had been unusually quiet since her mother's departure, but now she spoke with the maturity that crisis often brings to young people. What about custody? Mom said she'd take us, but we said we wanted to stay. Does that matter legally? At your ages, family court will consider your preferences heavily, Tom replied, especially given the circumstances that led to this situation. I have documentation of everything, Maggie said, gesturing to her laptop. Including recordings of today's confrontations, the children made their choices based on full knowledge of what was happening. Jake moved closer to his father's chair, his young face serious. "Dad, are you okay? You look really sad." Michael's composure cracked again, but this time it was grief rather than guilt. "I am sad, buddy. I made some terrible choices and now our family is broken. I'm sad that I hurt Grandma, and I'm sad that your mom and I couldn't work things out. But we're still family," Jake said with the certainty that children bring to complex situations. "Just different than before." The simple observation carried profound truth. They were still family, but the dysfunction and manipulation had been excised like a tumor. What remained was smaller but healthier. "Different can be better," Emma added, reaching for her grandmother's hand. "At least now everyone tells the truth." Over the following hours, they began the process of practical reconstruction. Dan called his partner Marcus to explain the situation and arrange extended leave. Tom contacted his lawyer friend and set up an emergency consultation. Michael began the painful process of separating his finances from Becca's and documenting the attempted fraud. The most significant decision came when Maggie announced her choice about living arrangements. "I'm staying in my own house," she said firmly. "It's my home, and I'm perfectly capable of maintaining it. But I want to be closer to family. Real family." "What if we made it easier for you to stay connected?" Dan suggested. "Better technology, regular visits, maybe someone closer for emergencies?" "I live 2 miles away," Tom said quietly. "I'd be happy to be your emergency contact." The offer was simple but carried deeper implications. Tom had become more than a friend. He'd proven himself an ally and advocate. The possibility of companionship in her later years, not dependence but partnership, was something Maggie hadn't dared to consider. "I'd like that," she said, meeting his eyes with a smile that held promise. Michael had been listening to the planning with growing resolve. "I want to make things right," he said. "I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to earn back your trust. All of you." "That's going to take time," Dan said honestly, "and consistent actions, not just words." "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes." Emma stood up, her 16-year-old authority impressive in its clarity. "Dad, we'll live with you during the week for school, but weekends are for Grandma, at her house where she belongs." "And holidays," Jake added. "Real holidays, where everyone's invited and no one gets put in basements." The plan that emerged was unconventional but functional. Michael would have primary custody during school weeks, with Emma and Jake spending weekends and holidays with Maggie. Dan would relocate closer to Iowa, using his remote work capabilities to be available for support. Tom would provide both technical assistance and companionship. Most importantly, legal safeguards would be established to prevent future manipulation. Power of attorney documents would be properly executed with independent witnesses. Medical directives would be clear and unambiguous. Financial protections would be implemented to prevent unauthorized access. As the sun set on this transformed Christmas day, Maggie found herself in her own living room. Tom had driven her home while the others packed her belongings from the basement, surrounded by people who had chosen to be her family, rather than people obligated by blood to tolerate her presence. "This is what Christmas should feel like," she said, watching Emma and Jake arrange the gifts they'd insisted on bringing to her house for proper opening. "Next year will be even better," Dan promised. "We'll have a whole year to get it right." Tom squeezed her hand gently. "Next year, we'll make sure no one spends Christmas in a basement." The foundation they were building wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was based on mutual respect rather than obligation, on chosen connection rather than enforced tolerance. The manipulation was over, the truth was exposed, and the real work of rebuilding could begin. For the first time in 3 years, Maggie Thompson felt genuinely hopeful about the future. 3 months later, the community center conference room buzzed with quiet conversation as 15 elderly residents gathered around a circle of folding chairs. Maggie sat at the front, her laptop connected to a projector displaying a presentation titled Digital Safety for Seniors: Protecting Yourself from Family Financial Abuse. What had started as Tom's suggestion for a simple technology workshop had evolved into something much more significant. Word had spread through Cedar Rapids about the grandmother who'd used her computer skills to expose her family's manipulation, and the response had been overwhelming. The first sign is often isolation, Maggie explained to the attentive audience. Family members who gradually reduce your involvement in decisions about your own life, who speak about you as if you're not there, who create scenarios where you feel like a burden rather than a beloved relative. In the front row, Dorothy Kellerman raised her hand. At 73, she'd been struggling with her daughter's increasing control over her finances. My Lisa keeps saying I'm too trusting, that I need her to handle my banking. But I've been managing money longer than she's been alive. Trust your instincts, Maggie replied. If someone's pushing you to surrender control before you're ready, ask yourself what they gain from that control. And remember, needing help with some tasks doesn't mean you need help with all tasks. Tom, serving as technical assistant, pulled up the next slide showing network monitoring basics. These workshops had become their shared project, combining his IT expertise with her research skills and hard-won understanding of elder abuse patterns. Emma, who'd become a regular volunteer despite her school schedule, distributed handouts. The 16-year-old had thrown herself into advocacy work with the passion of someone who'd witnessed injustice firsthand. Her school project on elder abuse had won the state social studies fair and caught the attention of local news media. What if our families get angry about us protecting ourselves? Asked Harold Chen, whose son had been pressuring him to sell his house and move closer to family in California. Then you know their concern wasn't really about your welfare, Emma answered before Maggie could respond. People who truly care about you want you to be safe and independent, not dependent on them. The wisdom from a teenager carried particular weight. These seniors had watched Emma stand up to her own parents, choosing truth over comfortable lies, and her moral authority resonated powerfully. After the workshop, Maggie lingered to speak with individual attendees. 3 had decided to seek legal consultations. 2 others were planning to implement the digital monitoring techniques she'd demonstrated. Most importantly, they were talking to each other, sharing experiences, and building the support networks that isolation had eroded. You've started something important here, said Sarah Chen, the elder law attorney who'd become a regular presenter at the workshops. I've had more calls about potential family financial abuse in the past 3 months than in the previous 2 years combined. The legal resolution of Maggie's own case had been swift once the evidence was presented. Becca had ultimately agreed to a divorce settlement that included admissions of attempted fraud in exchange for avoiding criminal charges. The forged power of attorney had been legally voided, and comprehensive safeguards were now in place to protect Maggie's autonomy. Michael's journey toward redemption had been slower and more complex. He attended family therapy with Emma and Jake, working to rebuild trust that had been systematically eroded. The process was painful but genuine. He'd confronted his own complicity and was learning to recognize manipulation tactics he'd previously accepted as normal family dynamics. Dad's different now, Emma told Maggie as they walked to the parking lot after the workshop. He asks us what we think instead of telling us what we should think, and he actually listens to the answers. The custody arrangement had evolved. Naturally, Emma and Jake spent school weeks with Michael, but their emotional center remained with Maggie. Weekends at her house had become gatherings that often included Dan, Tom, Pat Morrison, and various friends from the community center. The children thrived in an environment where their opinions mattered, and their grandmother was treated as the family matriarch, rather than a problem to be managed. Dan's relocation to Des Moines, close enough for regular visits, far enough to maintain his independence, had strengthened rather than strained their relationship. He'd taken a position with a nonprofit organization focused on technology accessibility for seniors, work that felt personally meaningful after witnessing his mother's situation. "Mom, you realize you've become famous, right?" he said during one of their weekly video calls. "I mentioned your story at a conference last week, and 3 people asked if you'd consider consulting on elder abuse prevention programs." The idea was intriguing. Maggie had discovered that her research skills, combined with her lived experience of systematic manipulation, created unique expertise in recognizing and documenting abuse patterns. Most significantly, her relationship with Tom had deepened into genuine partnership. They'd moved slowly, both understanding that companionship in later life required different foundations than romance in youth. But their shared interests in technology, community service, and family protection had created bonds that felt both comfortable and exciting. "I never thought I'd be grateful for spending Christmas in a basement," Maggie told him as they prepared for another workshop. But it led to all of this: the advocacy work, our relationship, the children learning to stand up for what's right. "Maybe that's the real lesson," Tom replied. "Sometimes the worst situations reveal who people really are, both the ones who fail us and the ones who stand with us." As spring arrived in Iowa, Maggie Thompson had transformed from an isolated widow into a community advocate, from a victim of manipulation into an expert on prevention, from someone whose family saw her as a burden into someone whose chosen family celebrated her strength. The ripple effects of her rebellion continued to spread, one protected senior at a time. The snow fell steadily outside Maggie's kitchen window as she put the finishing touches on Christmas dinner preparations. 1 year had passed since that devastating morning in Michael's basement, but the woman bustling around the warm, welcoming kitchen bore little resemblance to the isolated, manipulated grandmother who'd discovered her family's betrayal through security camera footage. "Grandma, the table looks perfect," Emma said, stepping back to admire their handiwork. The dining room had been expanded with folding tables to accommodate what had become their chosen family gathering, 12 people, who'd come together through love rather than obligation. The contrast with last year's forced celebration was deliberate and profound. Where Becca had staged artificial perfection, this year's gathering embraced authentic warmth. Mismatched chairs surrounded tables laden with dishes that reflected everyone's contributions rather than one person's vision of holiday presentation. "Pat's bringing her famous green bean casserole," Maggie said, checking her list with the organizational skills that had served her through 4 decades of library work and 1 year of elder advocacy. Tom's handling the tech setup for Dan's video call from Marcus's family dinner in Seattle. Michael's picking up dessert from the bakery, and the kids are managing music and entertainment. Jake looked up from arranging his latest artwork, a series of portraits showing their family's growth over the past year. "Should we save a place for Mom?" The question carried no hostility, just genuine curiosity about his absent parent. Becca had maintained minimal contact since the divorce, moving to California and remarrying within 6 months. Her communications with the children were sporadic and superficial, as if emotional distance could erase the manipulation they'd witnessed. "Your mother made her choices," Maggie replied gently. "Today is for people who choose to be here, who want to celebrate. Together, honestly." Emma nodded, understanding the distinction. At 17, she'd developed wisdom beyond her years about the difference between family by blood and family by choice. "Besides, we have everyone who matters." The afternoon unfolded with the comfortable chaos of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Pat Morrison arrived with her signature dish and stories from the community center's latest advocacy workshop. Tom brought both technical expertise and a small velvet box that he kept nervously checking in his pocket. Dan's video call from Seattle connected them with Marcus and his family, creating a coast-to-coast celebration that technology made intimate rather than distant. Michael's arrival carried the careful hope of someone still earning his way back into full family acceptance. His relationship with the children had slowly healed through consistent honesty and genuine effort to understand the harm his complicity had caused. His interactions with Maggie remained formally polite, but increasingly warm. The relationship of adults who'd survived crisis and chosen forgiveness over resentment. "I brought something," he said quietly, handing Maggie a wrapped package. "I found it in Mom's attic. I thought you should have it." Inside was a leather-bound photo album she hadn't seen in years, filled with pictures from the children's early years when family gatherings had been genuinely joyful. Photos of Emma learning to bake in Maggie's kitchen, Jake's first attempts at art projects, Christmas mornings when love had been authentic rather than performed. "These are beautiful memories," Maggie said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for preserving them." "I want to make more memories like these," Michael replied. "Real ones, this time." The dinner conversation flowed naturally between updates on everyone's lives and shared laughter over the year's developments. Emma's acceptance to 3 colleges had been celebrated by the entire community center. Jake's art exhibition at school had featured several pieces about family resilience. Tom's retirement had evolved into full-time volunteer work with senior advocacy programs. Most significantly, Maggie's consulting work on elder abuse prevention had grown into a statewide initiative. Her combination of research skills, technological expertise, and lived experience had made her a sought-after speaker at conferences and training sessions. "I got an email from the Iowa Department of Aging," she announced over dessert. "They want to fund a pilot program based on our community center workshops, digital literacy combined with abuse prevention, taught by seniors for seniors." The enthusiasm around the table was immediate and genuine. This wasn't polite family interest in an elderly relative's hobby. This was recognition of meaningful work that was changing lives. "You'll need program coordinators," Emma said immediately. "I can help design social media outreach to families. Let them know their elderly relatives are getting empowered, not just educated." "And I can handle the technical infrastructure," Tom added. "Set up secure communication networks for participants, maybe develop an app for reporting concerning behavior." As the evening wound down and guests began preparing to leave, Tom cleared his throat with obvious nervousness. "Before everyone goes, I have something I'd like to say." He stood, pulling out the small velvet box that had been his nervous companion all day. "Maggie, this past year has shown me what partnership really means. Not dependence, not convenience, but 2 people choosing to build something together that's stronger than what either could create alone." The room fell silent as he opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring. "I'm not asking you to be someone's wife again. I'm asking you to be my partner, my co-conspirator, my chosen family. Will you marry me?" Maggie looked around the table at faces filled with hope and love, Emma and Jake leaning forward with excitement, Michael nodding with genuine approval, Pat dabbing at her eyes with a napkin, Dan beaming from the laptop screen. "Tom Bradley," she said, her voice carrying all the strength that had carried her through manipulation, betrayal, and transformation. "I thought you'd never ask." The celebration that erupted filled the house with joy that felt earned rather than performed. Emma immediately started planning wedding details. Jake began sketching ideas for ceremony artwork, and Pat declared herself the unofficial coordinator of what would obviously be the community center's social event of the year. As the evening finally ended and the last guests departed, Maggie and Tom sat in her living room, watching the snow continue to fall and reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Last Christmas, I was trapped in a basement, discovering that my family was trying to steal my life," Maggie said, her engagement ring catching the light from the Christmas tree. "Tonight, I'm surrounded by people who celebrate my independence and want to build something beautiful together." "Sometimes the worst things lead to the best things," Tom replied, squeezing her hand. "Your rebellion didn't just save your own life. It created a whole new kind of family." Outside, the Iowa winter continued its quiet work. But inside Maggie, Thompson's house, warmth and love had replaced manipulation and isolation. The woman who'd been dismissed as a confused elderly burden had become a community leader, an advocate for justice, and a grandmother whose chosen family celebrated her strength rather than exploiting her vulnerability. The Wi-Fi password had been changed, but more importantly, so had everything else. Christmas was no longer about performance and control. It was about love, honesty, and the radical act of choosing each other every single day. In the end, that choice had made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories. Right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.